Hi everyone, it's Darren Coleman. We're going to be doing Coleman Wealth Home Edition, I think, for the next little while, as we're going to take advantage of the remote access systems and video conferencing that many of us are getting used to interview some key thought leaders, people that I've had an opportunity to meet and get to learn from a little bit. And today I'm delighted to have Dr. Joe Coughlin. Hi, Dr. Joe.
Hey, Darren, good to see you.
Dr. Joe runs the AgeLab at MIT, and I think it's fair to say, Dr. Joe, you're the world's foremost expert on aging and longevity. And indeed, you've written the book on longevity called The Longevity Economy, which is a bestseller. And I'm delighted to have met you many years ago. I've been to the AgeLab. I've had the benefit of seeing some of the work that you've done. You've done some presentations for our clients. And I thought today we'd spend some time talking about kind of this whole experience many of us are having of sheltering in place, and this quarantine situation is a little bit of a retirement fire drill for many people, right? Because I know part of the work the AgeLab does is help people prepare for those 8,000 days of retirement, and as people go through different phases of retirement. And there's a few checks and things that you do to see how ready people are. So many of us have suddenly had to discover what this is like. So would you mind taking a second and just explaining to everybody the work that the AgeLab does and why it's so important?
Sure. The AgeLab, first off, Darren, thank you for having me. It's a delight to be here. And as I know you work with clients on both sides of the St. Lawrence, as you may recall, I have a good half of my family in Ontario and Quebec, and the other half where I'm sitting out here in the U.S. So it's a delight to be with you and many of your viewers. So the AgeLab at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology is funded by industry to essentially reinvent how we think about old age. We look at the entire lifespan because aging, much to the chagrin of many, begins at age 0. There is no birthday where congratulations, you are now old, if you will. And so we look at things such as how are you going to retire, which we'll get into in a moment, but how do you get around? Transportation, driving, driver safety, the new technologies. How about the future of home logistics? As we are all finding now, the future of the home is as a platform of service, not simply just a place to live. How do we provide care to loved ones, either in our home or at a distance? And then finally, a work area that we're thinking about and doing some exploration in is the 5-generation workplace. I want you to imagine, we now have workers that are in their late teens all the way well into their 80s and 90s. If we slice and dice the boomers, the millennials, the two largest generations, essentially you've got 5 generations under one roof. This is unprecedented. We don't know how that's going to work. So to get to your question about the 8,000 days, and we can spin off of there, I want your viewers to actually do a little bit of math with me. After all, I am, MIT, and there probably will be a test at the end of this. If you
yeah, so there's always math at MIT, right?
Exactly. You got to have, it's, shall we say, God's natural language. Well, from 0 to 21 years old, or for those of us that make it easier, drinking age, if you will, is about 8,000 days. And, give me a little bit of give in those numbers. But from 21 to what many of us would call midlife crisis in our late 40s is about another, you guessed it, 8,000 days. But here's, I bet many of the viewers now are getting the algorithm. From midlife crisis to retirement age, typically if we average it out, about 65, is 8,000 days. And in Canada, like the United States and much of the industrialized world, the fastest growing part of the population are those 85 plus. And guess what? 65 to 85 and change is another 8,000 days. And what I would like to get my students and readers and viewers to understand is that we are not talking about a brief time of retirement. We are talking about an entirely new life stage. And that is what today we call retirement.
Right. And I actually, we've in our practice have changed from calling it retirement to longevity, because I don't think most people perceive that retirement phase of life to be as long as it actually is. And the fastest growing cohort, I believe, are women over age 100, if you kind of really subdivide it, right? So the men all die first because we want to, right? That's my joke.
In fact, there's an attorney in Vancouver who still practices. She's kind of cut back. I believe she's only down to 2 or 3 days a week, who's over age 100. So just because you're over 100 doesn't mean you shouldn't get up and go.
That's fantastic. So preparing for those 8,000 days, there's a number of questions that you kind of taught us to ask. around getting people prepared for retirement. And I think they're actually really interesting because I don't know how many people were as prepared to be sheltering in place. And I think some of the questions about being prepared for retirement would also help people to be prepared for this experience where our mobility is restricted, our ability to be connecting to people is somewhat restricted, and our ability to get things done is restricted. So the three questions that I love that you've taught us to ask are, when will you change? Who will change your light bulbs? The next one is, how will I get an ice cream? And the third one is, who will I have lunch with? So would you mind just kind of skipping through those and explaining why those were the three key questions that we should learn to ask ourselves?
Well, I wanted to make things profoundly simple because we're not just talking about, shall we say, something that you know about that I do not, things like portfolio construction. I can't even spell annuity, let alone portfolio half the time. So I try to stick to what's simple and what people actually get on a daily basis. Because retirement's about living. It's not just about vacations and trip to sunny places and maybe endless games of golf, especially the way I play. That's more a sentence than it is a reward. So the first question that we're all starting to find right now is, how are you going to change your light bulb? And it's not just about the light bulbs. I want you to think about all the little mundane things we do every day that we take for granted. Taking out the trash, preparing meals, yes, changing light bulbs. All those things that require a certain physical ability and a certain physical confidence that we can do it. Well, over time, whether it's chronic conditions or maybe a temporary surgery or maybe, frankly, frailty that begins to set in on all of us that is correlated with the natural aging process. Suddenly, climbing that ladder to change the light bulb, you may be able to do it, but your partner's going to be yelling up at you, "Hey, Joe, get off the ladder. You're going to break your hip." And then
I
you're going
have
to fall.
a feeling. Well, on that exact topic, I have a feeling you inspired the producers of the new Jumanji movie, because we were watching that the other day. And I don't know if you've seen it, there's a bit with Danny DeVito, who's supposed to be the dilapidated old grandfather with the walker and everything else. And he's actually above the kitchen table, standing on it, changing a light bulb as his family's shrieking at him, "What are you doing? You can't be doing that." And I'm going, Dr. Joe, I think, wrote the script for Jumanji, everybody. Don't tell. Because that's exactly the vision that you talk about and why we may want to do it, but physically, can we do it? And it's mowing the lawn, it's changing the light bulb, it's how do you walk the dog? There's so many things that we take for granted that if you can't do it, or your mobility or your physical ability is limited, how are you going to get it done? Who are you? What is the network of resources you can tap into?
And these days, one of the things I want your viewers to appreciate, this is not just about when you get old or when your parents become more frail. There is a profound retirement question in the who's going to change your light bulbs. Do you have right now someone that you would trust, and here's the litmus test, that you would trust to go into your, let's pick an age, 85-plus-year-old mother's home? She lives by herself. She's relatively frail. Do you have someone right now that you would say, yep, go into my mom's house, change the light bulbs, take out the trash, and shut the door gently behind you? Because if you don't have that for her and you don't have that for you, then frankly, you may be having a retirement plan, but you don't have retirement preparedness.
That's perfect. And we did an interview with Susan Hyatt last week of Silver Sherpa, and they do healthcare advocacy and help families deal with those healthcare crises. And she was talking about this is a perfect opportunity for people to really pay attention to the circle of care, particularly around elderly parents and relatives. Because if you live 5 hours away from a parent or an aunt or an uncle or someone, how are you going to manage those services and resources around them? And today, when many of us were not even allowed to travel, or let's say we can't even cross the border, you and I, to visit each other theoretically. So this idea of having these things figured out in advance, and if people have it, they're going to have to move pretty quickly to figure these things out, becomes very, very important when our mobility is restricted. And it's not just us, you're right, it's the people we care about.
Right. And, Darren, at the risk of doing a cheap push for my Forbes pieces, you were kind enough to give me time in an interview for my most recent Forbes piece, which you can find by Googling Forbes and my last name, Joe Coughlin. But COVID-19 is not just a terrible pandemic that is taking the planet. It really is, as frankly, I believe they were your words, Darren, a fire drill for retirement. Having that moment, if you will, where we're finding, do we have services? Who do we trust? Can we bring them in the house? This is, something you don't get to do for retirement, and yet retirement's the single largest thing anyone will ever buy. Think about it. You do buy retirement. You don't plan. By putting that money aside, you pay an opportunity cost for that flat screen TV, that second house on the lake, whatever it might be. And so this is a trial run in more ways than one. So the second.
And then that leads to, yeah, please go ahead. The ice cream question is my favorite.
Well, the second question is about the ice cream, and you say, why ice cream, Darren? Because as you've watched, we've gone out to eat before. You know that ice cream to me is a food group. But really,
I never argued that point either. I completely agree with you.
But here's the question. How are you going to get an ice cream cone? And it sounds silly. It's meant to make you smile. But it's got two dimensions that I want people to think about. First off, do you know the little things that make you smile? And that we often do in financial planning, as we should, in retirement planning, ask, what are your objectives in retirement or old age? Right. People come up with these grand things. They want legacy. They want to spend, make sure their grandchildren are taken care of, or they want to go to the beach a couple times a year or live on the beach, whatever it might be. But something, as you and I have spoken before, Darren, those are punctuation marks. Those are not life. No, what are the little things that make you smile? For me, I've got a, shall we say, a bad diet ritual. I love my morning blueberry muffin with my cup of coffee, extra sugar, if you will. But the other part of it is, I want you to imagine the following, particularly, my family growing up on the Thousand Islands and Kingston and that area. It's a hot summer night. You hear the peepers out. It's about 7:30 at night. The sun's still up. You want an ice cream cone. Not just any ice cream cone, but you want a soft serve. You want a, chocolate vanilla.
I can't do that at home. I got to go get it. You're right.
Exactly. You got to go get it. But here's the second part of that dimension of questions. First off, do you know what you like and that keeps you happy on a daily basis? Something maybe even your spouse doesn't even know is your little ritual. But here's the second part is, to your point, can you have access to it? Can you get to it? Do you need to drive where it is? Can you walk to it? So having that ice cream cone is really a litmus test for people that want to be retirement prepared to say, is everything I need within range, or do I have transportation options to get there? That's what's going to keep you happy in retirement, not just secure in retirement.
Right. So it's those two elements together. It's those little things that add richness to life, and knowing what those are and identifying them and having access to them. And then the second is mobility. How do I actually get there? Am I in a rural area? Am I in a city? Can I take the subway? Can I take an Uber? Can I not go anywhere at the moment? How do we navigate that for ourselves? So that's an excellent question. Then the third one, which is very appropriate for right now, which is about lunch.
Yeah. So about lunch is frankly social connection. It's that we all know that very few of us want to have breakfast with someone, especially, when you first wake up. So we'll pass on that. And dinners tend to be a very heavy family routine or a big investment. But we know when we retire, colleagues often say, hey, Joe, we'll see you later. No, we'll grab lunch. We'll have coffee. And that happens for the first few months, maybe the first year. And then, shall we say, it attenuates out where social connection begins to decline. Right. So the COVID-19 crisis is putting us all under that new pressure. How do we connect? How do we have, shall we say, that lunch? And I don't know about you, Darren, but I'm afraid I may start a new bad habit because I've been going to more virtual happy hours than I remember going to actual happy hours. And so really it's a test about how strong is your social network? Because as our parents taught us years ago, birds of a feather flock together. Well, here's something to think about. Social connection is not just about having people to talk to, but having people to remind you, did you take your meds? We care about you. By the way, they add a certain structure to your day about making sure that you eat, that suddenly a leftover pizza slice is not good enough. So social peer pressure is a way of staying socially and physically well.
So that's interesting. And it's funny you mentioned with the happy hour. I did that on Friday night with friends of mine that are, one guy's in Ohio, a bunch are in British Columbia. We used Google Hangouts, which is a technology I'd never used before. And we all, had a glass of whatever their beverage was of choice. And we just sat and kibitzed, and it was a lot of fun. And I think that's one element of this, which is we know we kind of have to do it, but it takes on added urgency when we are physically unable to kind of connect together for safety. But many of us are learning and experimenting with some of these technologies, which I believe will actually help people stay more connected going forward. So this fire drill will have, I think, some benefits to everybody.
Yeah, I think it's going to have lasting benefits. I mean, frankly, Darren, you and I talk all the time, and we talk all the time, but we are now adopting video where I have to say,
Right.
after the COVID crisis, I'm not sure I want to go back to the telephone.
That's a good point. I called my mother the other day, and I consciously thought I should do FaceTime. It's not something that I know for my kids, it's no big deal, but I don't consciously think about using FaceTime initially. I just pick up the phone and dial. Like we still have an old house phone. We're probably one of the few that still has an old home line. But I decided to FaceTime her, and my mother was like, "Why don't you ever do this?" She's very used to doing it with her friends. So all of us have to maybe get a bit updated with this, and she's more comfortable with the technologies than I am, which is a first from all the years I had to program her VCR for her.
Well, you don't think all technologies older people don't like, right? Bad technology.
Yeah, those got to go, right? Those got to go. You've also done a bit of work at the AgeLab recently, which I think is important to touch on, about the stress people are feeling right now and how they can manage this concern about the virus, obviously about the pandemic, about the economy. A little bit of work that you guys have done might be helpful to share, to help people maybe manage through what they're feeling right now.
Sure. I mean, I think many of us are raised to, shall we say, discount our feelings. But frankly, as we're finding in behavioral economics and frankly, any psychology 101 class will tell you that emotions are a critical part of good decision making. So we should not discount how we're feeling. First, I'll give you kind of a 101, if you will, on how it affects us physiologically. Physiologically, stress, if you will, actually jacks up cortisol and adrenaline levels and things like that. And believe it or not, it's kind of like driving. When you're stressed in driving, your peripheral vision begins to actually narrow.
Right. What's that fight or flight mechanism?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
And so essentially, we start to become tunnel vision. We're only looking at directly what's in front of us. But here's the bad part of that. We start not only, shall we say, filtering out negative information, which is a way of coping, but we also start to filter out good information. So I'm not going to get into the markets because that's not my expertise. But as much as the markets may be having difficulty in many places, there are parts of the market that are doing fantastic.
Very true.
Unfortunately, most people, when they're under stress, tend to look at, oh my God, such and such industry is going belly up. They fail to see that such and such industry is doing gangbusters that they would have never done before.
That's true.
So we have that tunnel vision. We get stressed. Darren, you may be interested to find that there was a study done after Fukushima during the earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear accident. Do you know that constant stress over time, they actually did brain scans on people that show that there was fewer connections being made in people's brains, that the neurons that were not connecting, which starts to eliminate everything from creativity, learning new knowledge, and coping. So this is a physiological real thing that we cannot deny. But in terms of real decision making, people should also be aware that being under this stress makes us unwilling to think about ambiguity. If I don't understand it, it must be bad. Unwilling to take risk. That is, I want something that's sure. I don't want something that, even though I might get a much bigger payoff for a little bet, I can't do it. I'm not going to do it. So to your point, Darren, to your question, to go through that, what we need to do is to set little routines, things that add predictability to our lives. If you're lucky enough to be able to work from home, get up, get dressed, shower. I tried the COVID beard for a few days, and my wife told me that I was either going to shelter in the yard or at home. So
I couldn't do it. I've got some friends, they wanted to have a bet on who could grow the best pandemic beard. And I gave up after a day and a half. This is not me. I can't do this.
Well, plus, I'm a little bit older than you, and I got a little depressed to show that my usual red beard on one side came out red on one side and white on another, and I just couldn't take the truth coming out all that.
Yeah, that's the Santa beard does not look like a candy cane, so that's not right.
Exactly. So the first thing is to set that routine if you're fortunate enough to work from home. But there's also another thing, is to make sure, we were talking about before, to set up social occasions, not just to bother your partner, but also to reach out to others, to have those happy hours, maybe to have lunch with someone. And then third, at the risk of being really dull and boring, all those little tasks that we've put aside that we don't want to do. And I
Very
believe
true.
that you were the one who gave me this idea, frankly, Darren, is, maybe finally make that list of passwords, get financial
Yes.
papers in order, do all the stuff that, frankly, for people like me who probably suffer from ADD but don't want to admit it, that feels a lot like getting your teeth drilled. But now that
Yes.
you have time to do it, go for it. I'm
Yep.
organizing an attic right now that basically is 30 years of junk of marriage that I have no idea what's up there. I've been putting it off for 30 years, piece by piece, because it looks like I'm going to have a lot of time on my hands. I might as well do it. But the thing is not just about getting things done. It's not just about that. It's the satisfaction that you have control to get this little piece
Right.
done in a context where we feel like we are powerless, meaningless, and that the rules are broken.
And I think that actually, that idea about gaining some power, I think that's why we saw people running out and buying toilet paper and all this other stuff, was just some sense of at least I can control this. And
Yep.
then there's a little bit of social proof. If they see other people doing it, they're like, maybe I should do it too. So that was
Right.
an odd behavior, but we understand where it comes from that perspective. But I think, yeah, bridging to having some control over things that are going to be positive. Because as I mentioned in my first walk with Charlie, I think when we get through all of this stuff, and you have to believe that we will, I think you're going to find people will be in kind of 1 and 2 camps as we all talk to each other, because this is like the first day of school again, right? Like, what'd you do on your vacation? So what did you do in the pandemic? And I think you're going to find some people that couch potatoed their way through the whole thing and tried on, they wore out their sweatpants. And then I think you're going to find other people that said, after a little bit of time, I got used to it and I discovered that I cleaned out my closet. I went through that photo album. I put those lists of passwords together that Darren's bugging me about. I learned how to play the piano or the guitar, or I actually read a couple books that had been sitting around. I ordered The Longevity Economy off of Amazon and I read it so I could be prepared for my retirement, right? So these are all things that I think if we look positively at how we can make our lives better, not only will that help us get us through this crisis, but I think it'll also prepare many people for those 8,000 days that, God willing, are all coming for all of us, right?
Yeah, this is exactly, because the alternative to not having those 8,000 days, shall we say, is not nearly as pretty. Now, Darren, I
Right.
know this is your interview, and I don't want to weigh in on your time, but are you saying that hoarding toilet paper is a bad behavior? I'm just.
Well, it's a good thing the border's closed. I can't come take that from you. So listen, on that note, I think we'll close it there. You've been very generous with your time. It's a delight to see you and communicate with you. And I'm so thrilled and flattered I can have this access to you. You did a wonderful job for our clients a couple of years ago when you came to Toronto and did a presentation. I think when we're all kind of able to visit each other again, we'd love to invite you to come back and do another one if you'd be willing. So thank you.
Darren, that would be a complete delight. And as you know, I work with financial advisors throughout North America and Europe, and you're one of my favorites. So you call, I'll be there.
I really do appreciate that, Dr. Joe. And on behalf of all of our clients and friends and viewers that are watching, we really appreciate the work that you do. It's certainly educated and informed my team to help clients more effectively, I think, and get prepared for those 8,000 days. And a lot of that work has actually helped us to prepare for right now. So thank you for that. I'll wish you all the very best. I love that you wore the bow tie for us this morning.
Keeping the routine.
Absolutely right. Thank you for that. And I wish you all the best. And wash your hands. And remember, the correct distance in the US is 6 feet, but in Canada, it's 1 poke check with a hockey stick. That's our distance measure. That's the Canadian.
Great. Take care.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.